The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. We continue to hear testimonies by the witness. The questions continue to be put by the prosecutor. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Witness, I have just a couple more questions for you before I turn it over to the civil parties. You've described for us earlier this morning executions of Lon Nol soldiers that took place at Penh. Were you also aware of any executions of Lon Nol soldiers or officials that took place in Tul Kork?
Response. Yes, I am, but there were only Lon Nol soldiers, not officials.
Can you tell us what it is, what took place, or what you recall in relation to executions of Lon Nol soldiers in Tul Kork?
Response. These people were killed after the radio broadcasts on loudspeakers and when they were tricked to reveal their identities.
The last area that I would like to ask you about concerns your battalion commander, Bong Hak. And I'm going to refer you to your OCIJ interview. The reference is at Khmer 00205-058, English 00223-347, and French 00705-379. And in this part of your interview, you indicate that Hawk later rose to the regiment level in charge of aircraft at Pontchatong, and that after that he was one of the military leaders who was purged. Can you tell us when it was that Bong Hak was promoted to a regiment level in charge of aircraft at Pontchatong Airport?
Response. I heard from members of my unit that he rose to the regiment level in charge of the Air Force at Pontchatong.
Do you know whether this was a position in a different division than yours?
Response. No, I'm afraid not. I don't know what happened to him because when he rose to that level, he has been separated from our unit, and I did not know what he did there.
Mr. President, I would note for the record that the OCP revised S-21 prisoner list, which is document E3/342, includes a Yang Hak, who is identified as a, quote, member of Division 310 hiding in Unit 502 and is number 11868 on that list. I have no further questions for you. Thank you, Mr. Witness, for answering our questions today. And I would turn over to the civil parties at this time, Mr. President.
The President. Counsel for Mr. Nuntia, you may proceed first.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be brief to not take away time from the civil parties, but I do object to this OCP tactic that they use repeatedly, which is to, after their questioning, to read out the S-21 prisoner list into the record. I do not object at all to them doing so, but they should do so at the end of the testimony of this witness and when all the parties have had a chance to question the witness. It is clear to any witness that being mentioned on an S-21 prisoner list has some importance, and witnesses are in this way fed information that they do not have prior to their testimony. So I would request the OCP to, if they want to read these prisoner lists into the record, to wait with doing so until the witness has ended his testimony and preferably until he has left the courtroom. That is our position.
Mr. President, if the trial chamber wants us to proceed in that manner and provides us the floor when other parties are done, I'm happy to do that, but we do not have the floor at the end of witness questioning, so this is our last opportunity to put things on the record relating to the testimony of this witness. But I'm happy to proceed in that manner if the court would rather have us make statements after the questioning by all the witnesses, questioning by all the parties, excuse me.
The President. The Chamber allows the court prosecutor to do as what they have just done, and that no other time would be allocated for the prosecutors to do so, and the parties should have already raised such issue in advance, and that the floor would then be given to the parties to have a few words concerning such objection. and it is appropriate that such statement or the reference to the document is made during the time allocated to the party who had the floor. The Chamber would like to now give the floor to the civil parties to proceed putting questions to the witness if they would wish to do so. Counsel Big Ong. Thank you, Mr. President, and Your Honors. I would like to hand over to Counsel Tisrina and Nushin Sakarti to proceed with the questioning to this witness. The President, you may proceed, Counsels. Counsel Tisrina. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning to you, Your Honors, and very good morning to Mr. Witness. I have a few questions to put to you, and I hope you would cooperate to respond to all the questions. I would like to go back a little bit in time to the events that happened before 1975. I would like you to tell the Chamber concerning what you remembered during those times. When you were a soldier in the jungle, how many divisions were there when you joined the army? Response: I'm afraid I don't know how many divisions there were. Question: are you aware of the communication between one division to another? Response: no, I'm not. I believe that the senior leaders or the leaders of the division could have been in contact, but ordinary soldier like me would not be informed. Question: did you receive military trainings on how to attack the enemies or capture Phnom Penh in particular? Response: yes, I was trained. Before we were recruited, or for the purpose of recruiting more soldiers, trainings were offered. Question: could you tell the court, please, how the trainings were conducted? Response: people were informed, for example, with regard to the suffering they had resulted from the American bombardment. So they made people feel the suffer, and they joined the army. Question: who actually incited or really provoked the spirit of suffering so that people could join the army? Response: those people were Ta Vương and the other village chiefs. They could tell us that the Americans bombed our homes and burned them down completely, so on and so forth. Question: were there meetings convened in small groups of soldiers like yours? Response: we were all offered the trainings. Question: were you also trained on how to identify the target of the enemies? Response: the idea was to make sure we felt the pain, the suffering, and that we treated people who caused this suffering our enemies, like the Americans. Question: apart from treating Americans as the enemy, were the Lonol group regarded as such? Response: Lonol soldiers and their accomplices were entirely regarded as the enemies, no doubt. Question: did you ever see any leaders coming to your area? Response: I saw a few of them, but I do not know them. These people could come to the location to propagandize, to make sure their message was communicated to the people there. Question: did you ever hear any broadcasts or announcements made by these people concerning the titles of Pol Pot, Ieng Sari, Khieu Samphan, and Nuon Chea? Response: no, I have not heard anything about them. I heard about then Prince Norodom Sihanouk, who appealed to the people to go to the Maki jungle or forest. Question: I would like now to proceed to the year of 1975. However, before 1975, I may have a few questions whether you had any meetings in which plan to attack Phnom Penh was instructed. Response: yes, there was such a meeting. The meeting in which instructions on how to attack the tactical line of the city, like at Basset. Question: who conducted the meeting at that time? Response: it was Bong Hak. Question: when Mr. Hak led the meeting in which the instruction was rendered, did you observe that it was his entire intention to capture Phnom Penh, or did he receive orders from upper echelon to capture the city? Response: I believe that he received orders from the higher up, because as the chief of the battalion, he had no authority to make such a decision. So the decision could have been rendered from higher above, and that he would just pass it on to the lower levels. Question: what did he tell his subordinates concerning the plan or the instruction rendered from his upper echelon? Do you still recall the wording he could have used in such meeting to his subordinates? Response: so far as I remember, he asked us to be well trained so that we could capture Basset. If we won the Basset's battle, then we would proceed to liberate or capture Phnom Penh easily. Question: when you approached Phnom Penh, did your groups see any Lonol soldiers? If you did, what was your reaction toward these people? Response: upon arriving the city, we had not seen any of the Lonol soldiers. We only saw civilians, people who were wearing civilian clothing, and we saw weapons scattered, left unattended on the roadsides. Question: this morning you testified before the chamber, before the co-investigators, that upon arriving in Phnom Penh, people had to be evacuated and the announcements could be heard on loudspeakers. Apart from announcing the evacuation plan through loudspeakers, were there any other means used at that time to make sure the city is emptied of population? Response: no, I believe that there were only loudspeakers announcements and that people would be asked to leave the city for a few days, 3 to 7 days. Otherwise, they would be bombed and die. So people were terrified and left. Question: were there any instructions to provide assistance to people who were evacuating the city at that time? Response: people were not assisted. The assistance we gave to them was surely the announcement that was made to let them leave the city all together with the whole family members, the hospital patients, and sick and elderly people, including children. Some people had to be on the push carts where they were pushed on the move. Question: were Khmer Rouge soldiers deployed at all directions to make sure that people could not enter or return to the city after being evacuated? Response: there were soldiers, group of 3 soldiers who were deployed to protect the city and to make sure that people could not re-enter the city. And it was true that people could never come back to the city after leaving it. Question: were there any checkpoints installed for this purpose? If there were, could you recall where were these posts could have been located? Response: some posts were seen at the Chroi Chongwa Bridge and Psathmai. These are the 2 locations I remember that the checkpoints were installed. Question: do you remember the purpose of having the checkpoints installed in these locations? Response: the checkpoints were mainly installed to make sure that the former Lonol soldiers were checked And we had no problem with the civilians because they had been moved outside of the city easily. Question. You just indicated before the co-prosecutors that your group was stationed at the French embassy. Can you describe to the court, please, what happened at the vicinity? Response. When we were at the French embassy, I saw no barang. The embassy was empty and quiet, and there were only soldiers there. Question. Did you see whether civilians or embassy staff members could have been taking refuge in the embassy compound? Response. No, there was none of civilian. The whole city was quiet and empty. There was no one, no civilian. Question. This morning you indicated that when you arrived at Phnom Penh, you already saw people being evacuated. Did you see monks were being evacuated among the civilians at that time? Response. I don't remember seeing any of the monks. I didn't see this in my location. Perhaps they could have been seen elsewhere, but I don't know. Question. This morning I heard you indicated that that's what happened during the Khmer Rouge time. Can you please be more precise what you meant by that's the situation during the Khmer Rouge time? What would you like to say about that? Response. I don't think I remember that statement. Question. If you may have some time to recollect what you said this morning, please. Question. Concerning the capture of Phnom Penh and that the city is empty, where were you at that time? Response. I was at the French embassy before being transferred to Tuol Song Kai, where I had to clear the bushes to farm the rice season farming or rice. I had to clear the small trees, and the soldiers were used like cattle to clear the small bushes to pave way for farmland. Question. At that time, were you aware of the plan to rebuild the city? If so, what was such a plan like? Response. There was no such plan to rebuild the city. I noted that some coconut trees could have been planted along the roadsides, and coconut trees were the only main trees to be planted to beautify the city at that time. Question. I would like to pose some questions concerning the political situation after the victory, after the Khmer Rouge won the victory over Phnom Penh and the country. After such victory, were you called to attend any meeting where celebration of the victory could have been conducted? Did you ever attend such celebration event of the celebration? Response. There were meetings where we were called to attend, and we would be lectured on how to help rebuild the country by working very hard to build the canals, the dams, dikes. And we were disarmed. We were treated like ordinary civilians and were asked to do farming. Question. Were you familiar or aware that at that time the leaders of the country were already appointed and pronounced? Response. At a later date, we were informed of who could have been the leaders. Before, the only leader we knew was the then Prince Norodom Sihanouk. But later on, we were informed that during the meeting at the stadium about the secretary of the party and who would be the top leaders at that time. The meeting was conducted at the Olympic Stadium, and we could see that all soldiers were attending that event, all soldiers from across the country, and I could see that people were on their feet when Pol Pot was in the center of the stage. I heard the name of Pol Pot was being mentioned, although I could not see his face very clearly. They started the event by reading the historical background. For example, the day when the meeting started at the railway station, and so on and so forth. And they also told us that we could really access to the whole recording through the tape if we would like to do so. Question, do you still remember when exactly that event was conducted or the meeting was convened? Response, it was in 1975. I don't remember the exact day or month. Question, after noting that Pol Pot was the leader of the country, or I may put it this way rather, at that time, did you see any other leaders, remarkable leaders of the Khmer Rouge attending the meeting? Response, I don't know any of them. I only knew the leaders of the regiment or the division. I never knew the senior leaders of the Khmer Rouge. Counsel Tisrina. Thank you, Mr. Witness. I would like to proceed to other questions, and I may go back a little bit to the evacuation time. You said that people had been evacuated for 3 to 5 days. According to your observation and experience, Were you aware of any such broadcast or announcement that people would be allowed to re-enter Phnom Penh after they were evacuated? Response. Politically, it was the political message that people had to be evacuated out of the city, and there was no such message as they would be allowed to return. Question. I have final 3 questions. First, about the money circulation. Did you remember when exactly money was no longer circulated? Response. I heard through the broadcast or announcement that money was no longer circulated. Question. When exactly was such announcement made? The President, Mr. Witness, could you please hold on until you see the red light on the mic before you proceed to respond? You may now proceed. Response. We heard about this through grapevine that money no longer circulated. Question. At Basset, after the victory by the CPK, were you resent to Basset location? Response. Yes, I was, but to be sent there as a canal worker, like to build canal and do farming rather than a soldier. Question. So who sent you there? Response. I don't know who sent us, but soldiers could be escorting us to the place where we did farming. Question. Can you please tell the chamber your impression concerning the food condition and living condition of the people at that location? Response. People suffered a great deal. Every member of the family who was mature enough to be put to work then had to work to carry dirt, to build canals, dams, and everyone could not be spared from this hard work. Counsel Tisrina, I thank you very much, Mr. Witness, for your responses. I have no further questions to put to you, and I would like to cede over to the floor to my colleague. The President, you have 10 more minutes to proceed. Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Your Honors. Good morning, Mr. Somche. I only have a few more questions for you. I want to ask you some more questions about the treatment of civilians during the evacuation. Now, when you were told to evacuate people out of Phnom Penh, did you receive any instructions on how to treat people that were too old or too sick to leave the city?
Response. As I said earlier, on, there was no such instruction to assist people. What they had to do is to make sure that the city was emptied of population. That's all.
Thank you. And you said that you entered Calmet Hospital during the evacuation. What happened to the people that were severely ill in the hospital and required continuous medical assistance? How were they evacuated from the hospital?
Response. I don't believe that there was such a care or service available to care for the sick people or elderly people. People only paid attention to making sure that everyone was being moved out of the city, and there was no such luxury like asking for permission to be still admitted to the hospital until they got cured before they could leave. I don't think it was the case.
And was any medication transported out of the hospital along with the evacuees?
Response. There were some medics who could be seen going to some hospitals to collect some of the medicines, and they could make the most of the available medicines at that time.
Were these medics working for the Khmer Rouge forces at the time?
Response. Yes, they were. These medics were also treating the Khmer Rouge soldiers.
And was the hospital used for any military purpose during the evacuation?
Response. The hospital, known in Khmer as Phnom, was used for that purpose.
And what was it used for exactly?
Response. I never been to that hospital during that time, but people were offered some medicines. There was no such IV fluid.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to ask you a bit about the methods used for evacuation. Did you see any Khmer Rouge forces enter people's homes to look for civilians?
Response. No, I didn't. After 5 days, the city was emptied and no people could be seen hiding in their apartments or houses. Everyone had gone.
Okay, thank you. So you said earlier that some soldiers resorted to harsh measures in order to evacuate the city. Did you witness any women get attacked during the evacuation?
Response: No, I didn't see any women being mistreated. That happened in my area because my people would just ask civilians to leave the city, and we kept telling them that they had to move quickly or they would be bombarded by the aerial bombardments.
And did you hear of any sexual assaults against women during the evacuation?
Response: No, I didn't. I had no knowledge of this.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. I just have a couple more questions. These are in regards to the Lon Nol soldiers that you encountered during the evacuation. Were any of these Lon Nol soldiers armed when you entered the city?
Response: No, they weren't.
Did you face any sort of armed resistance when you were evacuating Phnom Penh?
Response: No, we didn't.
And did you witness any of the Lon Nol soldiers surrender?
Response: Upon arriving Phnom Penh, we seen people raising white flags. Everyone was seen waving white flags. It was difficult for us to identify whether any one of the civilians could have been soldiers because there was no sign that they were soldiers, because we treated the people who were waving white flags as people who were defeated already and surrendered.
And after you made the announcements, after you had entered the city and made announcements for Lon Nol soldiers to come forward, did you see any of those soldiers come forward?
Response: No, I didn't. The announcements were made on loudspeakers by other units other than mine. And Kuhn, who knew about this, came to tell me about this information. In particular, he would talk to me about some former Lon soldiers or who did not tell the truth. They exaggerated the information, for example, by telling the people who had to make the announcements through the loudspeakers that they were holding higher ranks during the old days, so that they believed that they could be offered such a higher status. And later on, although they did not tell the truth, they were found out to all the detail and through the research of their biographies, and everyone ended up being killed.
Thank you, Mr. Somche. I have no further questions.
The President. Thank you, counsels. Thank you, Mr. Witness. It is now appropriate time for lunch adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn for now, and the next sessions will be resumed by 1:30. Court officer is now instructed to assist the witness and his jury counsel during the adjournment and have them return to the courtroom by 1:30 p.m. Counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia, you're on your feet. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our client, Mr. Nguyen Chia, would like to follow this afternoon's proceedings from his holding cell as he is suffering from a backache and a general lack of concentration, and we have already submitted the waiver.
The President. The Chamber notes the request made by Mr. Nguyen Chia through his counsel, in which Mr. Nguyen Chia has asked that the Chamber allow him to observe the proceedings from his holding cell due to the fact that he cannot remain seated for a long time in the courtroom. And counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia made it clear already that his waiver would then be produced in due course. The Chamber therefore grants such a request. Mr. Nguyen Chia is now allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell for the remainder of the day. The Chamber would like counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia to submit the waiver signed or given thumbprint by Mr. Nguyen Chia as soon as possible. AV unit is now instructed to ensure that the AV equipment is connected to his holding cell so that he can observe the proceedings from there for this remainder of the day. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Nguyen Chia and Khieu Samphan to their respective holding cell and have Mr. Khieu Samphan return to the courtroom when the next session resumes by 1:30 p.m. The court is adjourned.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ